The sun set behind the jagged mountains of Andaroth, casting a golden glow across the vast city that stretched beneath it. The air was thick with the hum of alien life, filled with sounds and smells that the human soldier, Jackson, had yet to get used to. As he walked through the grand palace gates, his boots echoed on the smooth stone floor. The planet of Veralia had always been a place of mystery, a hub of strange cultures and rich history. Jackson, a skilled diplomat, was here, on a mission to negotiate peace between the human colonies and the Verelian Empire. But there was one thing that had been on his mind ever since his arrival: the alien queen herself. Her name was Seraphina, a ruler like no other, known for her grace, her power, and her beauty. Jackson had heard whispers of her extraordinary presence, but nothing could prepare him for the moment he would meet her in person. As he entered the royal chamber, the grand doors slowly creaked open. His eyes met her, standing tall in the center of the room, surrounded by light. Her dark blue skin shimmered like the night sky, and her eyes glowed with a faint silver hue. She wore a crown of radiant gems that seemed to pulse with energy, and her long flowing hair moved as if caught in an invisible breeze. Jackson felt his breath catch in his throat, momentarily stunned by her presence. He quickly composed himself, reminded of his purpose. A polite bow was all he offered, but Seraphina's gaze lingered on him, studying him in a way that made him uneasy. There was something about the way she looked at him, as if she knew him, or perhaps as if she had seen something in him that no one else had. "Welcome to my court, human." Seraphina's voice was calm, yet it carried a weight of authority. "We have much to discuss." Jackson nodded, stepping forward. "Your Majesty, it's an honor to be here," he said, his voice steady despite the stirrings of awe within him. He had met many leaders in his life, but none quite like her. "Please come closer." Seraphina's hand reached out, an invitation to approach. "I have heard much about your kind. It is rare that we see humans here." Jackson hesitated for a moment before moving closer to her. As he did, something strange began to happen. His heart raced, and the air around him seemed to hum with energy. There was an undeniable pull, as if an invisible thread connected him to her. He shook off the feeling, attributing it to nerves. This was an important diplomatic mission. There was no room for distractions. When he stood before her, she extended her hand. The gesture was formal, as if to acknowledge his presence. Yet there was a softness to it. Jackson, not wanting to seem rude, reached out and gently placed his hand in hers. The moment their skin made contact, he felt a shock, like an electric pulse that ran through his veins. He immediately pulled his hand back, surprised by the intensity of it. Seraphina's eyes flickered with something like surprise, but it was gone in an instant, replaced by her usual calm expression. "I see," she murmured, her voice a little quieter now. "It seems we have more in common than I thought." Jackson, his heart still pounding, tried to mask his confusion. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to." "It is nothing," Seraphina said, her gaze steady. "Your touch was unexpected, but it is not unwelcome." Jackson swallowed hard, not sure if she was being sincere or if there was something more behind her words. He glanced at her hand, still hanging in the air, as if waiting for him to reach out again. The atmosphere felt thick now, charged with an energy that made his head spin. "Shall we proceed?" she asked, her voice once again authoritative. But there was a flicker of something in her eyes, a trace of curiosity, of something more. Jackson nodded, still unsettled by the strange encounter. "Yes, of course." As they moved toward the grand table in the center of the room, Seraphina's attention seemed divided between him and something far beyond. She looked at him once more, and for a fleeting moment, their gazes locked again. Jackson felt the pull of her presence, and once more, he couldn't shake the feeling that this encounter was far more significant than he had realized. The conversation turned toward the political matters at hand, with Jackson presenting his terms for peace. But despite the importance of the talks, his mind kept drifting back to that brief moment. The touch. What did it mean? Why did it feel so important? Serafina listened intently to his words, but there was a quiet distance in her eyes, as if something else was occupying her thoughts. She spoke only when necessary, offering insights into her people's needs and concerns. But every time Jackson looked at her, he saw the same flicker of something deeper in her eyes, a mystery that was just beyond his reach. Hours passed, and the discussions continued. But Jackson couldn't shake the feeling that their meeting was not just about diplomacy. There was something else between them, something he could not explain. Each time their hands brushed against each other as they exchanged documents or shook hands, a spark would jump between them, brief but powerful. As the meeting drew to a close, Serafina stood, her movements fluid and graceful. "You are a strange one, human," she said, her voice almost a whisper. "I did not expect to find such a connection here." Jackson's heart skipped a beat. He was certain he had not imagined the words, but the meaning was unclear. Was she speaking of the bond they shared, or was it something else entirely? He nodded, unsure of how to respond. "I'm honored to be of service, Your Majesty." Serafina's eyes softened for a moment, and then she smiled, though it was brief. "You will be tested, human, and when that time comes, remember this moment. Our paths have crossed for a reason." With that, she turned and walked away, leaving Jackson standing in the quiet room, his mind racing. What had just happened? What did she mean? And most importantly, why couldn't he shake the feeling that this was only the beginning? The days following Jackson's meeting with Queen Serafina were a whirlwind of diplomacy and unfamiliar customs. The Varelian Empire was a place of ancient traditions, but Jackson's task was clear: to ensure peace between the Varelians and the human colonies. Yet as much as Jackson tried to focus on the political matters at hand, his thoughts kept drifting, back to the Queen, the way she had looked at him, the way her touch had sent an inexplicable shock through him. It had been a simple gesture, nothing more than a polite exchange. But in those brief moments when their hands had met, something had changed. Jackson could not deny that there was a spark between them, something that went beyond the formalities of diplomacy. Over the next few days, Jackson noticed that Serafina seemed to be more attentive toward him. Their interactions were brief, often centered around the talks, but there was always a quiet moment, a lingering gaze that spoke volumes. It was as if she was trying to say something, but words weren't enough. Jackson tried to convince himself that it was nothing more than his imagination. After all, she was a queen, a ruler with duties far greater than anything he could understand. But every time their hands brushed or their gazes locked, he felt that pull again. One evening, after another long day of negotiations, Jackson found himself walking alone in the palace gardens. The air was cool, filled with the scent of strange flowers that seemed to glow softly in the twilight. The sky above was a swirl of deep purples and blues, and the twin moons of Virilia hung low, casting an ethereal light across the land. He paused, by a fountain, his mind racing. He had seen Serafina earlier in the day, and there had been that familiar tension between them, so strong it was almost impossible to ignore. She had smiled at him, a fleeting, almost imperceptible smile, but it had been enough to set his heart racing. "Thinking about her again, are you?" A voice interrupted his thoughts. Jackson turned to see his assistant Eli approaching with a grin. Eli was a tall, dark-haired man, quick to make friends, and even quicker to offer advice. He had been with Jackson through many missions, but this was different. Varelia was unlike any place they had visited before. "She's interesting," Jackson admitted, though he didn't really know how to explain it. Eli raised an eyebrow. "You're not the only one who thinks so. That queen of theirs is something special, isn't she?" Jackson glanced back toward the palace. "She's not like anyone I've ever met." Eli chuckled. "Of course not. She's a queen, Jackson. And you're just a human diplomat. But I've seen the way she looks at you. You're not imagining things." Jackson didn't respond. He had been trying to convince himself that Eli was wrong, that it was all in his head. But deep down, he knew something was there, something that neither of them could explain. As they continued to walk, Jackson's thoughts drifted back to Serafina. She had invited him to another meeting the following day, this time to discuss the final terms of the peace agreement. But what would happen then? Would they talk about the future of their people, or would the strange connection between them be addressed? The next day, Jackson found himself standing in front of the royal chamber once more. His palms were slightly sweaty, and he couldn't quite shake the feeling that this time, things would be different. He took a deep breath and stepped inside. Serafina was waiting for him, standing by the large windows that overlooked the gardens. Her back was to him, but the moment he entered, she turned to face him. The faintest smile touched her lips, and for a moment, Jackson forgot why he was even there. She looked so human. Despite her alien beauty, there was something in her expression. The sun hung low in the sky, casting a soft orange glow over the palace as Jackson stood at the entrance of the royal chamber. The night before, he had been unable to shake the feeling that something had shifted between him and Queen Serafina. Her words echoed in his mind. "Do not be afraid to touch me again. It may be the only way we discover the truth." It wasn't just the power in her voice that left him uncertain. It was the weight of the situation. There was something deep between them, something he couldn't quite understand but felt was too important to ignore. He took a deep breath and entered the chamber. As soon as he stepped inside, his eyes found Serafina, standing by a large window looking out at the distant stars. Her profile was striking, the sharp features of her face illuminated by the soft glow of the moon. She was a queen, a ruler, of unimaginable power, yet in this moment she looked vulnerable. For the first time, Jackson noticed the slight weariness in her expression. She had been bearing the weight of her people's future alone for so long. "You're here," Serafina said without turning. "Come sit with me." Jackson hesitated for only a moment before moving toward her, his footsteps light on the stone floor. He couldn't help but notice how the air seemed to shift with every step he took closer to her. There was something magnetic about her, something that pulled him in. He sat across from her, noticing that this time there were no formalities, no discussions of peace treaties or trade agreements. This was a different kind of meeting, one that felt more personal. "I've been thinking about our last conversation," Serafina began, her voice soft but steady. "And the touch we shared." She paused, turning to face him fully. Her eyes held a depth that was hard to read. "It's not just any touch, Jackson. In my culture, there is an old belief. A belief that when two beings from different worlds share a connection, truly share a connection, it can change everything. And this is not just a bond between minds, it is something deeper, something that ties us to the very heart of the universe." Jackson stared at her, unsure of what she meant. "You're saying that our touch could mean something more?" Serafina nodded slowly. "Yes. In Virelia, we believe that touch is a conduit for energy, a way to connect souls. I know it sounds strange to you, but what we shared, it wasn't just an accident. It was a call, a signal from the stars themselves. My people have long believed that only a human, a being of your kind, could awaken something in me that has been dormant for centuries." Jackson's heart raced. "Awaken what?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "The true power of a Virelian queen," she replied softly, her eyes narrowing as if seeing something far beyond the walls of the palace. "For generations, my ancestors have ruled Virelia, but they were never able to unlock their full potential. They believed it was a gift given only to the gods. But the truth is, the power is within us all, within me. The touch we shared is the key to unlocking it." Jackson tried to process her words, but the weight of them pressed against his chest. The idea that their brief touch had set something in motion was overwhelming. "So, what does this mean for us? For me?" Serafina's gaze softened and she leaned forward, her voice gentle but filled with certainty. "It means that our fates are tied together now, Jackson. Whether we like it or not, we cannot ignore what has been awakened. The peace we seek, the future of my people, it all depends on this connection. On you." On us. Jackson swallowed hard. He wasn't sure if he was ready for this. He had come to Veralia thinking his role was to negotiate, to bring peace, but now he was caught in something far greater, something that felt beyond his control. I don't know what to say. There is nothing to say yet, Serafina replied. Only to feel. You must allow yourself to embrace the bond we share. The energy between us is not something that can be explained in words. You must trust it. Trust me. Jackson looked at her, his mind swirling with confusion, doubt, and something else. A strange pull he couldn't ignore. His heart beat faster, and for the first time he realized how deeply he was affected by her presence. He wanted to believe her, but how could he? He was just a soldier, a diplomat. He had no idea how to navigate this kind of power, this ancient connection. Before he could respond, Serafina stood and moved toward a large, ornate chest at the far side of the room. She opened it and took out a small, glowing crystal. It shimmered. In her hand, radiating an energy that seemed to hum in the air, she returned to Jackson's side and held the crystal out to him. This, she said, is the Heartstone. It was passed down from my ancestors, and it holds the key to the power I have yet to unlock. The stone can only activate when the bond between us is complete. It will show us the way, but it requires us to connect fully. Together. Jackson stared at the stone, its glow faint but alluring. He reached out slowly, taking the stone from her hand. As soon as his fingers brushed the surface, a strange warmth spread through his palm, and he felt a jolt of energy rush through his arm, up his chest, and into his heart. The sensation was overwhelming, like a current of electricity, but softer, warmer. For a moment he thought he might collapse under the force of it. Serafina's eyes met his and she stepped closer, placing her hand gently on his. You see? It is already starting. The Heartstone reacts to our touch. It recognizes us, Jackson. You and I are the catalyst for something ancient. And together, we will unlock it. Jackson's mind raced as he looked down at the Heartstone in his hand. He had never felt anything like this before. It was as if the universe itself was aligning around him, urging him to accept this connection, to embrace what was coming. But was he ready for it? Was he ready to become part of something so much greater than himself? Serafina's voice interrupted his thoughts. You are not alone in this, Jackson. I will guide you through it. Together we can shape the future of Veralia and the future of our people. He didn't know what the future held, but as he looked at the Queen, standing beside him with that same unwavering gaze, he realized that he couldn't turn back. This connection, whatever it was more than just destiny. It was their only chance. The air in the chamber was heavy with the weight of their words, the unspoken promises, and the electric connection between them. Jackson stood there, still holding the Heartstone, its warmth pulsating in his hand. His mind was racing, trying to make sense of everything Serafina had just told him. There was no turning back now. The bond between them had been sealed, and with it came a responsibility that he couldn't ignore. Serafina stood beside him, her eyes fixed on the glowing stone. She seemed distant for a moment, lost in thought, before she finally spoke again. There is something else you need to know, Jackson, she said, her voice softer than before. Something that has been hidden from me for a long time. Jackson looked at her, feeling the weight of her words. What do you mean? Serafina glanced down at the Heartstone in his hand, her fingers lightly brushing against it. There is a prophecy, she began. A prophecy that has been passed down through my ancestors. It speaks of a time when a human, a being of your kind, would come to Veralia and awaken the true power of a Verelian queen. But this power, as it was foretold, comes with a great cost. Jackson's heart began to race again. A cost? What do you mean? Serafina looked up at him, her eyes filled with both sorrow and determination. The prophecy says that the awakening of this power will change everything. It will bring both great prosperity and terrible destruction. The balance of the universe itself will shift, and the fate of my people will be decided by the actions of one human and one queen. Jackson swallowed hard, the weight of her words sinking in. So, we're not just talking about Virelia. We're talking about something much bigger, aren't we? Serafina nodded slowly. Yes, this connection between us is not just for my people. It is for all of existence. The Heartstone, the power we share, it is tied to the very fabric of the universe. The prophecy says that when the time comes, the human who shares this bond with me will have the power to reshape the stars themselves. Jackson felt a chill run down his spine. He had come to Virelia to negotiate peace, but now he was part of something much bigger, something he couldn't yet fully understand. What happens when this prophecy is fulfilled? What does it mean for us? Serafina's face softened, and she stepped closer to him, her hand gently resting on his. I do not know all the details, Jackson. The prophecy is ancient and its meaning has been lost to time, but I do know that the moment you and I accepted the bond, we set the prophecy into motion. The energy between us is a force that cannot be stopped. It is the beginning of something we can neither control nor predict. Jackson's mind was spinning. And what happens if we don't follow through? What if we break the bond? Serafina's expression darkened and her voice dropped to a near whisper. If we break the bond, it will not only destroy us, it will destroy Virelia, and possibly the entire galaxy. The energy we have awakened is far more powerful than we realize. If we fail to fulfill the prophecy, the consequences will be catastrophic. The gravity of the situation hit Jackson with full force. He had no idea what he had gotten himself into. The fate of an entire world and possibly more was now in his hands. I never asked for this, he said, his voice tinged with frustration. I came here to help, to negotiate peace, not to become part of some ancient. The next few days passed in a blur of meetings, preparations, and strange, unspoken moments between Jackson and Queen Serafina. The palace was alive with activity as the Virelian Council prepared for the ceremony that would, in their eyes, decide the future of their people. Jackson, still reeling from the weight of the prophecy, tried to focus on the task at hand. But his thoughts kept drifting back to Serafina and the bond they shared. Every time their hands brushed or their eyes met, the energy between them grew stronger. Jackson could feel it, a subtle hum in the air, a force pulling them closer. Yet, he knew that the path ahead would not be easy. There was still so much he didn't understand about what they were meant to do. The Heartstone had only offered vague glimpses of power, but nothing had come to him in a way that he could control. In the quiet moments between the chaos of diplomacy, Jackson found himself questioning everything. Was he really the one who could help Serafina fulfill this prophecy? Was he truly part of something that would change the course of history? Or was he just an accidental player caught in the middle? He stood outside the royal chamber, his heart heavy with doubt. He had promised Serafina that he would stand by her, that they would face whatever came together. But now, as the ceremony approached, Jackson wasn't sure he was ready for what would come next. Jackson? The voice pulled him from his thoughts. He turned to see Serafina standing in the doorway, her expression a mixture of concern and determination. She had always been strong, but today, she seemed more fragile than he had ever seen her. Her eyes were tired, and the weight of her crown seemed to press down on her shoulders more than usual. Are you all right? She asked, her voice soft, but filled with the strength that had always defined her. You seem distant. Jackson took a deep breath, trying to steady his nerves. I'm fine, just thinking about everything that's happening. This prophecy, this bond between us. It's a lot to take in. Serafina stepped closer, her eyes searching his. I know, but we are in this together. I need you, Jackson. More than you know. His heart skipped a beat at her words. He had always known that this mission was important, but he hadn't fully understood just how deeply it would affect him. Serafina was more than just a queen. She was a person, a woman who had carried the weight of her people's future for so long. And now she was asking him to help her carry it with her. I don't know if I can do this, Jackson admitted quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. I don't know if I can live up to what the prophecy says. Serafina reached out, placing her hand on his. The warmth of her touch sent a familiar surge of energy through him, but this time, it wasn't just the power of the Heartstone. It was something deeper, something that bound them together in a way that transcended words. You don't have to do this alone, she said softly. We've already come this far. We've already shared something that is beyond us. The prophecy doesn't just say that you and I must succeed. It says that we must do it together. Only together can we unlock the full power that we've awakened. Jackson nodded slowly, the weight of her words sinking in. It wasn't just about fulfilling the prophecy or saving Virelia. It was about them, about their connection. He had never expected to become part of something so monumental, but now he understood that this bond was something they both had to face. And though he didn't know what the future held, he knew he couldn't walk away from it. Not now. I'm with you, Serafina, he said, his voice steady. I don't know what will happen, but I won't leave you. A small smile tugged at the corners of Serafina's lips. Thank you. That means more to me than you know. They stood there for a moment, the silence between them filled with understanding, and though the uncertainty of what lay ahead still lingered, Jackson felt a sense of peace in the presence of the Queen. He had made his choice. He was with her, no matter what came next. The ceremony began soon after, and Jackson found himself standing beside Serafina, watching as the council gathered in the grand hall. The room was filled with the sounds of whispers, of soft murmurs as the members of the council exchanged glances. They had all heard the stories of the prophecy, of the human who would come to awaken the Queen's true power, and now they were about to witness the beginning of that journey. Serafina stood tall, her regal presence commanding the room. She wore a simple, elegant gown, her crown resting lightly on her head. But there was something in her eyes, something that Jackson had come to understand in the short time they had known each other. She was strong, but she was also human. And like him, she was afraid of what the prophecy meant. As the council members fell silent, the room grew still, and Jackson could feel the weight of the moment. He and Serafina were about to take the first step toward fulfilling their destiny. But with that step, everything would change. For better or for worse, their fates had already been sealed. The high priest of Virelia stepped forward, his long robes trailing behind him as he approached Serafina. He bowed deeply before her, his hands raised in a gesture of respect. Your Majesty, he said, his voice reverberating through the hall. It is time. Serafina turned to Jackson, her gaze steady and filled with resolve. Are you ready? She asked softly. Jackson nodded, his heart pounding in his chest. As ready as I'll ever be. Together they stepped forward, their hands meeting as the high priest began the ancient ritual. The Heartstone in Jackson's hand glowed brightly, its energy crackling in the air around them. The room seemed to vibrate with power, and Jackson could feel the weight of the universe itself pressing down on them. This was it. The moment that would decide the fate of Virelia, and the moment that would shape their future. The ceremony had begun, and Jackson could feel the weight of every moment. The grand hall was filled with people, Virelians dressed in flowing robes of every color, their eyes full of anticipation and wonder. The air crackled with energy, and the Heartstone in Jackson's hand seemed to pulse, as if responding to the emotions of those around him. Serafina stood beside him, regal and calm, but Jackson could see the tension in her eyes. She had always been a leader, always been in control. But in this moment she was as vulnerable as he was. They were about to perform the ritual that would seal their bond and determine the future of not just Virelia, but the entire galaxy. Jackson could feel it deep in his chest. This wasn't just a ceremony. It was the beginning of something much bigger. The high priest raised his hands, signaling the start of the ritual. The room grew silent, and all eyes turned toward the two of them. Jackson took a deep breath, trying to steady his nerves. By the power of the stars, by the strength of our ancestors, we call upon the forces that bind us, the high priest intoned, his voice echoing through the hall. This moment is the beginning of the awakening. The human and the queen, their destinies intertwined. Let the energy flow. Jackson's heart pounded as he and Serafina stepped forward, their hands meeting once more. The connection between them flared to life, sending a rush of energy through his body. He could feel Serafina's presence, her power merging with his, the two of them becoming something greater than they had ever been before. It was overwhelming, yet strangely comforting, like finding a part of himself that had always been missing. The heartstone in his hand grew brighter, its light illuminating the entire hall. A low hum filled the air, vibrating through the ground, beneath them. The room seemed to spin, and Jackson felt as if the entire universe was watching them, waiting for them to succeed, or fail. But even as the power surged, Jackson couldn't help but feel a sense of dread. The prophecy had been clear. Their bond was both a blessing and a curse. The power they had awakened could bring great prosperity to their people, but it could also destroy everything they had worked for. If they failed, if they could not control the energy they had unleashed, the consequences would be catastrophic. Serafina's grip on his hand tightened and he looked over at her. Her eyes were closed, her expression focused, but there was something in her gaze that told him she was just as unsure as he was. They were in this together, but that didn't make the weight any lighter. The high priest spoke again, his voice rising above the hum of the ceremony. This is the moment of truth. The bond must be completed. The human and the queen must unite their wills, their hearts, and their souls. Only then will the full power of the Heartstone be unlocked. Jackson took a step closer to Serafina, his heart racing. He could feel the energy swirling around them, drawing them closer, pulling them into something greater than themselves. For a moment, everything went still. The room, the people, the universe, everything seemed to hold its breath. Serafina's eyes met his, and for a moment he saw the vulnerability in her gaze. She was the queen of Virelia, the ruler of an empire, yet in this moment, she was just a woman, asking for his trust, asking for his help. The weight of that responsibility settled over him, and he realized for the first time just how much he cared about her. Without a word, he stepped forward, closing the distance between them. Their foreheads touched, and the power of the Heartstone surged through them both. It was like a jolt of electricity, but warm, comforting. The energy flowed between them, and Jackson felt himself being lifted, as if the very stars were carrying him away.